here. Tonight we are going to make an Irish shepherd's pie. We're going to work on our sourdough loaves for tomorrow, and then we're going to make some discard biscuits. So let's start with our shepherd's pie so we can get that stewing. I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil in the Dutch oven roasting dish. Since we're going to be putting this in the oven at the very end, I put about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half in here. And then we are going to chop up one yellow onion. I'm going to use my big cutting board for this. So we're going to cut off the sides. And then I'm going to make a nice big slit right here. And we're just going to pull off this whole outer one because those just aren't good and it just makes it easier to chop. So it's cut in half. And then we're going to do just a simple dice on it. So I made 5 slits that way. And now I'm just going to go through and make little squares essentially. There we go. And do my 5 slices. And then we're going to turn and make our little squares for our little dicing. Okay. I'm going to add my diced up onion to my dish over here. And the reason I chose this dish instead of my regular Dutch oven is shepherd's pie kind of has a stewed meat and vegetable bottom, and then we're going to put mashed potatoes on the top, and then you just bake it in the oven for a few minutes to kind of crisp up those taters on the top. You can always put a little cheese too if you want, but my kids like it without the cheese. So we've got our onions and our olive oil, and then we're going to put in about a spoonful of garlic, around a teaspoon and a half, so like 2 to 3 cloves. And then I'm going to go get a spatula and we're going to just stir it up a little bit and let these start to caramelize while we prep our stew meat. So I'm going to get one of my silicone spatulas and we're just going to coat our onions completely with the olive oil and our garlic so that they can begin their caramelization, which will bring out their natural flavors. And now I have some stew meat here, which is just different cuts of beef. Shepherd's pie, you can make it with stew meat. You can make it with lamb. You could also make it with ground beef or ground lamb are kind of the most traditionals. We had lamb stew earlier this week, so we are going to do it with some ground or some just beef stew meat, which is typically just leftover cuts from the butcher that they chop up. So I'm going to go in with my cleaver and cut some of these a little bit smaller because some of the chunks they give you are fairly large, too big to eat on their own. And we want them to tender up and cook up nicely. So I'm going to use about half of this stew meat, which is about 2.5 pounds. And then we'll save the other half for dinner another day. Okay, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to chop up my stew meat into about little cubes that are kind of, 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch sizing, just something that's a bit more manageable when we're eating. Because when you think about when you're cutting up or dicing any vegetable, think about how you're going to eat it, especially if it's in a stew or we're doing a shepherd's pie here. Give this a little stir. And then we're just going to chop these guys up. You could also, if your store doesn't carry stew meat, which is typically cheaper than buying a roast, you could use a chuck roast. Chuck roast would be delicious for it. It's a very tender meat and has some nice marbling in it, so that would work well, better than some of the other roast cuts that you get. There we go. With these, I get my stew meat most of the time. I just grab it from Costco. It's really reasonable there, and I find that Costco has a pretty decent butcher. I think their steaks are pretty awesome, and I've been pleased with most of my meat cuts there. Sometimes you get a grocery store, and their meat cuts are like me, but I've been happy with Costco, and it works well for our family since we do have like a small army that we feed every day, so anything you can save on is great. Okay. Getting this all chopped up. Oh, for those of you who don't know, this is a cleaver. It's specially for cutting meats. And it just works much nicer than a chef knife or a Santoku knife to just chop your meat up because you get a little bit more heft behind the blade, which allows you to cut through the flesh nicely. We'll get this chopped. And there. So growing up, I had shepherd's pie a lot, but my mom made it a little different than the way I did. Growing up, she made it with ground beef, and that's like a cheaper way to do it. Stew meat's a little bit more expensive, so she did hers with ground beef, and I mean, I still loved it a lot, but I like to make ours just a little bit more hearty, and so I do mine with beef stew meat. But you can do it either way. I mean, they also do it with ground lamb, which I think would actually be really delicious. I've never actually made my shepherd's pie with lamb before, but I think I might try that in the future because it sounds pretty yummy. There we go. And we're almost done chopping these guys up into some nice bite-sized pizzas. Perfect.
You have a question? You made corned beef the other day. You're doing shepherd's pie today. What other Irish things are you doing this week?
I'm going to do an oxtail soup. I'm going to do a Guinness and beef stew one night. And then I saw on the New York Times that had a recipe for this Guinness chocolate cake, which looks delicious. And then I'm going to make beer bread with a yeast, not a sourdough. I've never made a beer bread with sourdough. So I'm going to do my traditional, I usually make a beer bread every year for St. Patrick's Day using Guinness or like other Irish beer. And then I'm just going to do an Irish apple cake, which is, I love it. It's one of my favorite dishes I make. And then I was going to do Irish or bread pudding with a Bailey's cream sauce. That is one of my mom's favorite desserts I make. I do it in a Bailey's and raisin cream sauce that pours over my bread pudding. And if you don't know what bread pudding is, think of kind of like a French toast casserole. It's just, bread that's soaked in a lovely custard sauce. Okay, we've put all of our stew meat in this pot with our onions, and we're going to let them kind of sear off. I'm going to get my cleaver and my meat cutting board out of the way. And then I'm going to give my hands a quick wash. Since we're done holding our meat. Okay. While this is starting to brown, we do need to start on our potatoes. We'll peel those up, and then we're going to start on our sourdough. So let's get our potatoes in so they can boil up, because the top of a shepherd's pie is mashed potatoes. So I'm using russet potatoes because I personally think russet potatoes make the best mashed potatoes because they're nice and fluffy. They're not as waxy as like a new potato or a gold potato or a yellow potato. So they get a really fluffy texture, which I love for mashed potatoes. So we're going to be using some russets. And I'm going to give them a peel, and then we'll chop them up, and then we'll throw them in our water so that they can start boiling and getting tender for our mashed potatoes. My kids love this dish because they love mashed potatoes and they love gravy, and this stew meat kind of has its own little gravy on it when you make it. So it just is like almost just like a meaty gravy with your mashed potatoes, and they really like it. And it's delicious. Sometimes it does go by the name cottage pie, but just growing up, it was always shepherd's pie to me. But I know a lot of people call it a cottage pie as well, which are very similar if you think about it, a shepherd and a cottage. It's like the same area, same type of thing. Okay, I've got these nice and peeling them up. My kids do not like skins on their mashed potato, which is also another reason why we do russet, because the other potatoes you don't really need to peel for it, but my kids like theirs to be just nice and fluffy. So we're going to get these, and I try to aim it so we have 5 big potatoes, and that's going to make enough to kind of do a nice thin layer over the top of our little roasting pan right here. You sometimes you think you made enough mashed potatoes, but always make more than you think, because it takes a lot more to cover the top of your little stew meat than you think. So we've got 5 pretty big russet potatoes here, which is probably equivalent to, 8 to 10 medium-sized one, because this is a pretty big potato. But we're gonna cut them up, boil them, then we'll mash them with some butter and cream and a little bit of salt. There we
You
go.
got a question? Do you make a meatloaf?
I do make a meatloaf. I haven't made it in a while. My kids don't always, I love meatloaf, but my kids are not a big fan of meatloaf. I will say 3 of them like meatball, but my husband and 2 of them don't. So I don't make it often, but I'll have to try it sometime. I love meatloaf. I just think it's a good food that makes you think of like your childhood. But I should try it sometime. I haven't made it in I want to say a year or 2. I haven't made it in a while. Mainly because I feel like a lot of times I get stuck on cooking kicks and I will cook the same recipe, a couple of times. And then it's like, okay, we're going to have beef stew and then we're going to have this. And I repeat it in a month. And then I realize oh, I need to change it up. We've been eating this a lot. Especially when you change season and you get into oh, these are my fall and winter, recipes. And then you go and you're like spring recipes, summer recipes, and you just kind of get in a rut of cooking your favorites. But I've been trying to change it up a little bit more, changing it up so I'm not making the same type of beef stew. I might try different recipes or, different takes on it, even though it's very similar, to get it a little bit changed up. But I find, I think humans are creatures of habit. So we like to kind of get stuck in routines. And so I'm always trying to, push the box and just be a little bit different so that my kids don't become super picky or super stuck in their habits of eating the same food every single day. Sometimes my kids will be like, I want this and I want this. And I was like, we just had spaghetti and meatballs, or we just had this. And they're like, I know, but I want it again. You always hear about those kids who will eat chicken nuggets every single day. They're like, I want this. And then I want, So I try to push it to where my kids don't have that option to necessarily eat the same food every single day or week. Because I just hope, it's like you sit there and you hope your kids aren't picky eaters. But I find kids go through stages. When they're little, they'll eat everything. And then once they turn about 4 to 5, they start to get their big opinions about food. And I feel like they're stuck in their big opinions about their food until I want to say 11 or 12. And that's when all of my kids then start to kind of branch out again. And now my 15-year-old and my 13-year-old, they're starting to get a lot more bougie and trying a lot more stuff. Especially when we went on our cruise, I was so surprised about my 15-year-old. She tried everything from all of the different cuisines. And I was just really proud of her. Even if she didn't like it, she tried it and she gave everything an honest try.
You have a question? What about a ham loaf? Do you have a recipe for that?
You know what? I've never made a ham loaf before. So, but I can always look into it and see and try it out. I'm just going to pour a little bit out of my water out here because it's a little bit high and I don't want it to boil over. There we go. So, got it. Sometimes you guesstimate how much you're going to have in there. Okay, let me give our meat a nice stir and we're going to let it continue to simmer. And our onions, we'll add some spices in just a little bit. But while these are simmering, let's work on our sourdoughs for tomorrow. So we are going to make 2 types of sourdough. We're going to start both with the basic one. So we'll have our basic sourdough, and then I'm going to make a chive and not cheddar, but Dubliner cheese, which is an Irish cheese, kind of stick with our Irish theme this week. Okay, let me clear right here, get my scale up. So for our basic recipe, we're going to start with 100 grams of active sourdough starter. You know it's active. We fed this today right after our lunch stream. and it's nice and bubbly. So that's when you know it's active. You got to feed it a couple hours before you use it. So I'm going to give it a nice stir. So I'm going to use 100 grams of my active sourdough starter. Oh, that drop was 100 exactly. That's like winning the lottery. Okay, so we've got 100 grams here. And then I'm going to put 100 grams in my next bowl. Put my thing on. And then I'm going to do this here, and it's going to be like 150 grams. Let's see. Get it in. Close. 105. So we've got our 100 grams in each one. And now we're going to add 375 grams of warm water. So this water is nice and warm. And just like tap water, whatever your sink turns on, high warm, so you don't have to get it scorching hot. And we're going to add it to each of our starter. You want 375 grams, which is about like 1.5 cups. Perfect. And then we're going to add it 375 to this one as well. Now let me turn. There we go. Perfect. And then I'm going to take and add about 2 teaspoons of salt to each one. And you can, I'm just eyeing it, what I know a visual teaspoon looks like. And then I'm going to give this with my dough whisk a nice little stir to kind of dilute my starter into the water so that when I mix it into with the flour, I'll make sure I get it all evenly mixed. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to take here. And the reason also why you want to use warm water when you're making it is because it incorporates easier into your flour and allows it to hydrate faster. That way you have just a nice dough to work with. It'll be a little sticky at first, but there we go. Okay, and now we're going to just add 500 grams of bread flour, unbleached bread flour to each one. And then we'll mix it in and we'll let it sit. And then after we've done our first, we'll do our first stretch and fold, then I'll add in my inclusions for my fancy bread. Okay, so 500 grams is around 3 cups or so. So I'm just going to scoop it out.
What's the starter consist of?
The starter is made of just flour and water that has been fermented. So it's been sat out on your counter every single day. And then you just feed it a little bit of flour and water every day. So you take it out. I do have some videos posted on our page, on the link on our page, about if you want to create your own starter to start sourdough bread. But just so you know, it's a journey, and it's not a hard journey. It's just a long journey. You can't just say, oh, I want to start sourdough and expect to have bread right away. It's going to be a week to 10 days before you can make a loaf of bread, because that's how long you need to kind of ferment your starter every single day, feeding it with flour and water and whatnot. But there's lovely recipes that you can use the discard for, because you got to throw away a bit of your stuff every day. And you can make some great baked goods, all sorts of stuff with it. But it is a long journey, but it's not hard. So here we've got 500 in both of these. We put these out of the way. And now I'm going to use my dough whisk, and I'm going to mix them together. So for those of you who don't know what a dough whisk is, just this little metal circle-y thing, but it allows the flour and the water to continuously pass through it, which is different than a spoon. So if you try to use a spoon, it gets like stuck on your spoon, the basin of your spoon, versus the dough whisk just allows it to continually move through. And it's great for making doughs. There we go. And you see how it just incorporates lovely, and it looks a little bit sticky now, but that's because the flour hasn't completely hydrated. and it gets drier and drier as it sits. So we've got this one mixed, and we're going to let it sit for a little bit, and then we'll do a fold and stretch, and then we will incorporate our inclusion into our bougie bread, which will be chives and some shredded Dubliner cheese, which is kind of similar to an aged cheddar. So we'll mix this up and set it. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to just let them sit and hydrate and just shake off that dough off my dough whisk. Beautiful. Now let's come over to our stew.
Yeah, another question. The starter, how long can you keep the starter?
It can go forever. There's like restaurants or bakeries that have had their starter for like 100+ years. So you're just constantly feeding it and replacing it, and the natural bacteria and the fermentation process keeps it healthy. Now, if you don't care of it, it can mold, and then you have to throw over and start over. But you just feed it every like 1 to 3 days on your counter, or if you put it in your fridge, you can feed it up to like 10 days. You can go between feeding. But it's really not super challenging or difficult. Okay, we're going to peel up our carrots, and we're going to add our carrots into the stew meat real quick. So I'm just going to do a nice peel on all of them. You could use baby carrots that have already been washed and peeled if you wanted to. But again, I just buy a lot of my stuff in bulk because we are feeding a small army, and these are what you get. So I'm going to chop off my ends and my tips just because they don't always, they're not the best texture. And then I'm going to just do a small chop on this. And when I get to where they're a little bit thicker, I will halve them. There we go. And now I'm going to have them. That way they're just not a super huge carrot chunks. Now, you could always add more carrots to this if you want, but not all my kids are big fans of carrots, so we have them for the adults and my little ones who like them, but don't go over crazy with them. So we're going to add these in here, and we're going to let them stew with the meat as well. There we go. Mix it up. And then we're going to add some seasonings in. So let's start with some Worcestershire sauce. You need about 1.5 tablespoons. So I'm just going to eyeball it. But 1.5 tablespoons is what you're going to want. And then we're going to add in some dried parsley. You could use fresh if you wanted, but I find dried also works really well for this. And you're going to want about a tablespoon and a half, or half, or teaspoon and a half, about 1/2 tablespoon. And then we're going to use some dried thyme. I had to restock all of my spices today because almost all of them were gone. Now this one doesn't want to open. I feel like all of my spices run out at the same time. And then you go there and you're like, oh, I've got to spend like $100 to get new spices. There we go. So we're going to use about 1/2 tablespoon of dried thyme. And then we're going to use 1/2 tablespoon of rosemary, of dried rosemary. And you could use fresh as well if you wanted to. And let's give these a nice stir so they can start kind of stewing in there. And this will season up our shepherd's pie with just a lovely, nice flavor to the meat, as well as it will make a lovely gravy. So let's got that going. And now we're going to cover our meat base for our shepherd's pie with some black pepper. We're going to use about a teaspoon of it. Spread it all around. And then we're going to use some garlic salt as well. And we're going to put about a teaspoon of it because we're also going to be using some beef broth to help add some saltiness to it. Whew. just popped out of my hands. Okay, we're gonna give.
Question: what's your personal favorite dish?
Oh, my personal favorite dish is probably ravioli. I do make a really good ravioli, and I love it. Um, Especially a butter. It's like a brown butter and sage with butternut squash and Italian sausage ravioli. I love that one. But also my just Italian sausage and cheese ravioli that I make. I do love that. But it's a long process. Okay, so we've got our meat stewing here. We're going to add in a good spoonful of beef bouillon. You could just use beef broth if you wanted to, but I find beef bouillon, I can add a bit more and give it a little bit more flavor. So we're going to add this in here.
And you're going to what? Make the ravioli in 2 weeks or what?
Yeah, something I've been planning on it. I've been getting some requests to make ravioli. Even my kids are like, when are you going to make ravioli again? Because they do love it, but it's a long thing. So I've got that. And now I'm going to add in some broth, but I'm going to use a little bit of my potato water because it has some starch in it. Now you could use just straight up water if you wanted, but I'm going to use the potato water because it has some potato starch, which will help thicken up our.
You have a question? Will you have this whole recipe available?
Yes, I can make a recipe card and then we'll have it. It'll probably take me a couple of days for a recipe card, but I will get that out. Plus, we always post our live videos. So you can, on the link on our page, you can go back and reference that as well. And you can just make it along with me in the video. But yes, I will work on getting some of these. I normally do recipe cards for my baked goods, but I'll do this for some reason, this little can, there we go, got to go slow. So this is some tomato paste. We're going to use about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste in here, and this is just going to give it a lovely flavor. That's about 2 tablespoons, and we're going to mix it up in here, and then I'm going to add in the rest of my potato water. Now again, you can just use regular like water if you wanted to. There we go. Just nice and slowly to kind of rehydrate those tomato paste. And this is going to give it just a really lovely gravy that then this whole dish will kind of sit on top. The mashed potatoes will sit on top of it. So we're going to let this put a little bit more in. Here we go. Now I'm just going to let this simmer while we make our biscuits, and then we'll make our mashed potatoes and we'll do our inclusions. So I'm going to turn this down to low. We're going to let this simmer and let it kind of reduce, which is letting like the water kind of evaporating, and it will make a nice thick gravy for this. Okay, let's make our biscuits. Let me move this just over here since we'll need that for the mashed potatoes. We're going to make a sourdough discard biscuit. So we get this, and then let me grab my flour over here because I don't want to use bread flour for my biscuit. I want to use all-purpose flour. Okay, so we are going to start out by adding in 2 cups of flour. Let me grab a measuring thing. So we want 2 cups of flour in here. And then we're going to add a tablespoon of baking powder and then 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. So 1, 2. So we've got our 2 cups in here. And let me grab this paper towel. So I'm just going to take my paper towel here and I'm going to blot off see the white foam on top of the potatoes. That is potato starch, and it will cause your things to boil over, but it also will make your mashed potatoes a bit more sticky. So I always like to either rinse my potatoes really good after I cut them, or I just kind of use a paper towel and blot off that potato starch that's up at the top, just to give me a nicer, fluffier mashed potato. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we have our 2 cups of flour in here, and now we need to add in our baking soda and our baking powder. me grab my, here we go. So we need a tablespoon of baking powder. So don't want to do soda because then your biscuits will go. So a tablespoon of baking soda or baking powder. I messed that up there. So tablespoon of baking powder and then a 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. So just a little bit of the baking soda, which has the bigger kick to it. And there we go. And then we're going to add in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Get my salt right here. Perfect. And I'm going to give this a quick mix with my pastry knife just to mix up the baking soda and the salt and the baking powder all together because we want it to be nice and mixed up. And now I'm going to cut in 1 stick of cold butter. So I'm going to take my butter right out of the fridge because we need 1 stick of very cold butter. So I didn't want to let it sit out because that's going to give you the nice flaky layers in this biscuit. And I'm going to first start by cutting this up in here into little chunks, and then I'm going to use my pastry knife and cut the rest of it so that I have no pieces of butter bigger than a pea. So I'm going to go through and just kind of chop it into 4s and do some little chops. This just helps my pastry cutter go a little bit faster than if you were to just put the big old stick in there. Now you could also use a food processor if you wanted to, and you could just coarsely chop the butter in with the food processor. It works just the same. I just like to do it with a pastry cutter because this is a lot easier to wash in my dishwasher than a giant food processor with the blade and the lid and all that jazz. You know, whatever we can do to save dishes. So we're going to cut our butter into our flour and baking soda mixture. And then we'll add a little bit of our seasonings toward the end. But we're going to use a 1/2 cup of milk and 1 cup of sourdough discard. It can be active, so my starter is active and it's fine. But we're going to use a little bit of that in our biscuits, and it just makes the best biscuits. And then we're going to add in some chives and some Dubliner cheese. And I do have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. So we're going to chop these in until we have nothing small or bigger than a pea. Because if you do have a big chunk, what will happen is you'll have like a big butter pocket in your biscuit, which isn't necessarily the worst thing that could happen to you, but it won't give you as nice of a texture. Okay. So I'm just cleaning out my pastry knife. Sometimes butter will get stuck in between the blades. And we're just going to go over one more time. And I'm just pushing in and kind of twisting with my pastry cutter. There we go. So now we have our butter cut into our flour mixture. And that has our salt and our baking powder and our baking soda in it. And now let me grab a bowl. And we'll use this one for our things. I need to add in, so this is another one. We fed it earlier. It's nice and bubbly, but it doesn't matter if it's active or not. So we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of milk. Let me move this so you guys can see a little better in here. And then I'm going to add a cup of sourdough discard to this because it'll be easier if I do I dilute it with the milk and then add it in there instead of trying to put it all in at the same time. If you do that, then it might not mix up nicely. So there is a cup of our discard. I'm going to add it into our milk. And then I'm going to give this a nice stir. And then we will carefully add it to our biscuit mixture. But the trick is with biscuits is you've got to just be careful when you mix it in, because if you over mix your biscuits, then you're going to have rocks. They'll be hard. So the trick is to just do a fold and a press versus to like stir. Okay. So we got to really dilute this up. This is our sourdough, a discard, a cup of that with a half a cup of milk. I used whole milk. And then we're going to add this to our butter that's cut into our flour, baking soda, salt, and baking powder mixture.
I got a question. Do you save your discard, or is it just for your daily feed?
It's really just from my daily feed from what's left over. I make recipes almost every single day, so I never have to just like put it in the fridge to keep, and I never have to throw it away because I'm always making a recipe with it. I'm going to give our meat a little stir over here. Beautiful. Perfect. And now let me grab a spoon that we can kind of lightly stir this up with. And then we're going to turn it out on our counter here after we add in some cheese and some chives. But you want to give it a light mix first. And it's going to be kind of a shaggy dough. You don't want it to be super wet and sticky, because then you just won't have the right consistency in your biscuit. Okay, so I'm going to leave it kind of at this type of shag. And now we're going to get our cheese and our chives ready to put in it. So here, got a little container of chives.
Do you have a question? Is your sourdough gluten-free?
No, it is not. So it uses regular flour, and I have never experimented with gluten-free flour. I'm not sure if it would actually turn out or not, simply because the gluten in the flour is kind of gives you the good crumb in it. So I have unfortunately not done that before, and I'm not sure how it would try out. So I'm going to give our chives a nice little chop up here. So I'm going to save the rest of these for our things. We're going to add, I'm going to go over them a couple more times. Chives are in the onion family. They're similar to a green onion, just smaller, have a more delicate onion flavor to them. They're delicious, and they add a lovely pop of green. Okay. So we've got this. We're going to add those straight into our biscuit mix now. And then I've got my cheese grater. And we're going to be using some Irish Dubliner cheese from Kerrygold. Yes, Kerrygold. Just keeping up our theme. And I'm just going to grate up about a cup or so of this in here. And you could always substitute this for cheddar cheese, so like a kind of a cheddar cheese and chive. But we're kind of keeping on our Irish theme. This cheese tastes similar to an aged cheddar, slightly different flavor profile, but it's pretty close. There we go. There we go. That's about a cup. And we're going to mix that in there. I'll save a little bit because that was a little more. I'm going to move this out of the way so we can do our press and fold with our biscuits. And we're going to be using that Dubliner cheese in our one of our sourdoughs. Okay. So now is the fun part where we're going to get in with our hands. And I'm just going to kind of toss it a little bit. And then I'm going to put it out on our counter and do my press and fold, which is going to give our biscuits their flaky layers. So you don't want to knead it. You just want to press and then fold it into each other. So press and fold. So you're just scooping up and folding. This is going to create, every fold and press down creates a new flaky layer. The trick is not to like handle like Play-Doh or to knead it. It's just to press and fold. And that is the key to those delicious flaky layers in a biscuit. And now the big warning again is do not over mix or over like press and fold, because that will create a really stiff dough or a stiff biscuit. So now I'm going to just press it out. You see how it didn't take very much press and folds to get this into a lovely thing. So just pressing it to about the thickness that I want. And now let's prepare our baking sheet. I do have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. And we're going to take some parchment paper. I'm going to lay it right there. And then let me grab my biscuit cutter, which is, oh, where did you go, biscuit cutter? There it is. Hi, everyone. Got my biscuit cutter.
You have a question? How do you know when to stop mixing?
When it holds together nicely, you can see here, if you can see closely, you can see the layers, the nice flaky layers in there. Once it's holding together, but it's not crumbling apart, that's when it's the right consistency. If it's still crumbling apart, then you'll need to press and fold it together, but it doesn't need much to hold it together. Get all of these out, and then what we'll do is we'll press our last few pieces together to make our biscuits, or a couple more biscuits. So here, we'll bring this together and then press and fold one more time. A lot of times your last biscuits will explode. They won't have as quite of a nice pop like those because you've kind of pressed them together and they've got some little, like, I will say, like breaks in them. But you don't want to, that's the thing is you don't want to over press and fold them because you want them to have the nice supple texture. Let's see. And just spread it apart. And this will just be a really cute little one. This will be perfect for my 1-year-old. Trying to make it the right height so it doesn't, that one will cook up the fastest. Let me see, I'm gonna look through it. My thinnest ones are gonna go in the middle because they don't get as much heat. Now we are going to pop these in the oven. We'll rub butter on them at the end, so we're not gonna cover the tops with butter or anything like that. And these are gonna cook for about 15 minutes until they're ready. And while we're doing that, we will make our mashed potatoes for our shepherd's pie. I'm going to put my timer on so I don't forget about them. And then I'm going to give my hands a quick wash because they're covered in biscuit dough. And then we're going to make our shepherd's pie, finish it up. Okay, let's check on our potatoes here. I'm thinking they are just about perfect. But the way I check, I'm going to pull up a potato. I'm going to find my biggest one in here. And if my fork goes through it easily, they're ready to mash. So you see how my fork just went through it easily? That means they are perfect. If your fork gets like it's caught on it, that means they need to cook a little bit longer. So you want them to be nice and tender and soft. But you don't want to overcook them because the potatoes will just disintegrate when you do. Okay, so here we're going to strain them. So I'm going to bring this over here, use my colander, and just pour all that water out. There we go. Perfect. And then give it a couple of shakes, and then I'm going to pour it right back in here. Because this is a stainless steel pan, I am going to just beat my mashed potatoes in this bowl. If you are using a non-stick pan, do not beat it in there. You will completely ruin your pan. So I'm going to add in a stick of butter. I'm going to kind of cover it with the potatoes, and we're going to let it melt for a hot second. And there we go. And while that is melting, we're going to get some cream and some salt. So you're going to want to salt them up nicely. So I'm going to put in about 2 teaspoons of salt in here. And we're going to add about 1/4 of a cup of cream. And we might need to add a little bit more just in case it's not fluffy enough or smooth enough. I'm going to give my stew meat here a nice stir, but do you see how it's thickening up nicely? That's kind of the reduction in it. We're going to throw in some peas at the last minute, but I like to wait until the very end to throw in the peas because you don't want them to get brown. You want them to stay nice and lovely. So here we go. I'm going to start mixing these up. Beautiful. Okay. And I'm going to add a bit more cream because I want my potatoes to be, this is kind of a really fluffy. I want them to be nice enough to spread lovely over it. So I'm going to add another 1/4 of a cup. You know, you just never know until you've whipped them up how much exactly you need. But you want them to have a really lovely, there we go, a lovely whip to them, but not chunky. So speed this, get them on high, and whip it through. Get all of those big chunks out. Beautiful. Okay. And then I'm going to taste to see if I need to add any more salt, because now is the time when you want to do it before you put it on your thing. Attach more salt. Again, remember these were 5 really large potatoes. So we'll add a pinch more salt. And whip it up real nice. There we go. Perfect. Now you could always do your mashed potatoes in your stand mixer if you wanted to, or you could hand mash them. I just find it's easy to whip them right in here, and it will, it's just really quick cleanup too. Okay, so we're gonna toss in our peas. My kids aren't like a huge thing, so I'm only using about a cup of peas, but you can add more if you wanted. But see, we wait till the very end so they have that nice vibrant green. You know, the longer they cook, they kind of turn a little brownish. So we've got that now. I'm going to push all of our meat down. And we're going to take our mashed potatoes and we're going to kind of scoop them up and we're going to lay them on the top of our meat. Just like this. Now, if you really wanted to be fancy, you could get a piping bag and pipe them on it. But you know what? I'm all about, let's be practical here. This is the food we're going to eat. We're not serving it in a restaurant, you know. We just need to have happy, full bellies at the end of the day. So we're just going to press it. And get it all in there. And that's why I said you always need more potatoes than you think. So these 5 huge potatoes just beautifully covered this. And almost done with all of it. Now, some people like to sprinkle the top of their shepherd's pie with cheese. My family does not like it that way. So I just put a couple pats of butter right on the top, and then we pop this in the oven for a few minutes until that kind of potato gets a crust. And when that potato has a crust, our biscuits will be done. Okay, so let me bring this over here. And then we're just going to take, let me get my knife right here, and we're going to just cut a little bit of butter thinly. You don't need to be super thick. And this is just kind of give you a nice kind of top on it. We'll spread it around. I'll get a couple more pats. Beautiful. I'm going to turn that off. I'll slide it off. And then I'm going to use a little bit of chives and just sprinkle it over the top. Gives it a lovely pop of color and gives our potatoes a nice little oniony flavor to them.
You have a question? Do you and your family go out to eat at restaurants often?
We go out to eat a couple times a month, here and there, you know. But we are a large family and we have little ones. And I will say going out to eat with a 1 and 3-year-old is not the most fun thing. When they get older, it's much nicer. But yes, we do go out a couple of times a month. But again, most of the time we're pretty busy. We've got to, we're home and it's just, I whip up food. Let me grab my pot holders. We're going to put this in the oven right next to our biscuits. Then we're going to make the inclusion for our sourdough bread. And then it will be time for us to eat in just a second. So here is our shepherd's pie, and we're just going in. This isn't baking to cook it. It's baking to get it nice here. Let me just pop it over here. I'm going to pull up. I realized I had this still in here from yesterday when I did my, pull it down here. What is it? When I did my big Irish dinner and I didn't have, perfect. I'm going to put that right there. I'm going to put this under. My big Dutch oven can only fit on the bottom row. Those will be done in a few minutes.
Yeah, question. Do you guys have full-time jobs as well?
Yes, we do. We both work. We are fortunate enough to work from home, but we do, yes, have full-time jobs. I actually have my doctorate in education from Vanderbilt University, and I do educational consulting, and my husband does consulting as well. But we are fortunate enough to be able to work from home, which just allows us to also do this, which is kind of a passion of mine. I press our thing. We're going to peel up our cheese. I really enjoy cooking. Like what I do here isn't much different than what I would be normally doing, except I get out my ingredients for every, beginning. But, I cook these meals every day for my family. So it's not like I'm doing something extra. I'm just sharing it with the world because I feel like people think they can't cook when they really can. I didn't get any specialized formal training cooking, but I've just practiced it through the years, and I've, learned and picked up on tricks of the trade. And I want people to know that they can create great meals at home. They don't have to spend a fortune to go out to a restaurant all the time to get great food. You can do it at home, and you'll be surprised with how well you'll be able to cook in no time. It just takes, a little bit of effort and believing in yourself. And trust me, you will make mistakes along the way. I make mistakes all the time. Even now, I've been cooking for so long, and I make so many mistakes. And a lot of times my mistakes are just because I'm just not paying attention and I forget and I burn something, but everybody does it. I one time made a mistake and I added way too much vanilla in a recipe, and I wasn't even thinking. I remember I was young and we were making cookies. I think I was like 15 years old or something like that. And we read the recipe, and for some reason we thought the tablespoon of vanilla was a cup. So we were like, we don't have a cup. So we went to our neighbors and we're like, can we borrow some vanilla? Still didn't have enough vanilla. Went to another neighbor, asked for vanilla. They were the worst cookies ever, but did I give up? No, I'm still making cookies today, and I have learned how much vanilla you put in a recipe. Okay, we're chopping up our chives nice and fine, and we're going to be adding this as an inclusion to our sourdough. So we have our Dubliner, our Irish Dubliner cheese, which is similar to like an aged cheddar, and we're going to do a fold and pull. So here is, if you've never done a fold and pull, I'm going to get a little bit of flour to dust my hands with. Makes it a little bit easier. So if your dough's a little sticky, just flour your hands up. I'm going to kind of pull it apart. I'm going to put my whole inclusions in here. So I've got my chives. That's about a half a cup of chives. And this is about a cup and a half of cheese. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull and fold. Pull and fold. And when you're doing an inclusion, you're going to have to do a couple more pulls and folds than if you're just doing a regular one. But we'll just pull and fold. And the beauty of it is this is really what you do to make a regular sourdough. It's not anything different. You're just adding some ingredients after the first hydration round. Okay, so we're got it. And this dough is sticky now, but when it's going to be ready to bake tomorrow, it will not be sticky. It just will fully have hydrated. So we've got our pull and our fold. The reason why you do the pull and the folds on it is it breaks the gluten, which makes the better elasticity in your bread. So here is our one. And in 15 minutes, we'll do another pull and fold, and we'll be doing that like 4 more times over the next 2 hours, or in 30 minutes. It's every 30 minutes you do a pull and fold. Let me wash my hands, and we'll do our pull and fold with our next one, and then dinner is just about ready to be served. Okay, get my hands a little coated in flour, just makes it easier, and we pull and we fold it into each other. And this is really activating that gluten in there, and this is what's going to give you that lovely crumb on your sourdough. And so it's not doughy and gummy. It's helping the gluten activate in here as well. And then we're rising. So what I do is I have this we do our pull and fold. I do it for the next 2 hours. Then I will leave it out on the counter overnight covered. And in the morning when I wake up with the kids, I do my where I stretch it out and I do the laminate and the forming, and I put it in my banneton baskets, and then I pop it in the fridge until we're ready to bake it, which you can bake it that evening or up to 2 days. So not hard, just takes time. Okay, let me get my hands a quick wash, and then I think our dinner is just about ready. Okay, we're gonna pop here. I'm gonna clean up just a second because we have 1 more minute. And people, feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I love to try to help people out, and sometimes, people are stuck on something or they're doubting and they just understand. Ask away. If I can help you answer it or whatnot, that would be great.
There's a question. Where did you get the start for the sourdough bread?
So I made my starter myself, and it is super simple. I do have these videos posted, so you can start from day 1 and through day 7. And the basic start for our starter is 150 grams flour and 150 grams water. Has to be unbleached flour, otherwise you won't get the good fermentation process. You mix it together, you cover it with a cheesecloth, and then you let it sit on your counter for 1 day. And then you kind of repeat that process, but you throw away half of it every single day, and then you add the flour and the water in again. And about a week of doing it, you'll have a good fermented sourdough starter, which then you can make bread with. And then what you do to keep it living is you just keep feeding it and then discarding, and then you make recipes for discard, which are always great, like our biscuits. Okay, guys, it looks like dinner is ready. Oh, beautiful. Look at those layers on those biscuits. I told you they were going to pop up lovely.
You have a quick question. Why do you throw away part of your starter?
So if you didn't throw it away, you would have to use twice as much flour and water. And by the time you got done with it, you would have a heaping gallon full of starter, which would be what you could make 50 loaves with. So you throw it away or you use it in discard recipes so you have a manageable amount. Otherwise, you're going to be like the crazy lady with gallons full of starters.
And then you have another question. Why don't you cover the pot on this meal?
On this one, because I am melting the butter on it to get a nice crispy crust on the top. So the meat had already stewed, the mashed potatoes are done. You just kind of cook it and it gives you that nice crispy crust. And some people like a melted, they put cheese on it and then they melt that on the top. So that is an option, but my family doesn't like the cheese on the top, so I omit it. But I'm going to serve it up. It's best served in a bowl, I found, because it's kind of like a beef stew with a mashed potato. So I'm not going to use my cauldron today. Everyone seems to like my little black cauldrons. I'm just going to use a flatter bowl. But let's pull up. Just look. Do you see those flaky layers of it? That is literally the fold and press. Every time we folded and pressed, we made one of those beautiful layers in there. And that's why I said you can't knead it. You got to do a fold and press. Okay, let me scoop up our delicious shepherd's pie. just marvel at the beauty of it. And you're just going to kind of cut it. And then you're just going to scoop up underneath it. And you've got this, and then you've got to scoop. See, this is that delicious meaty gravy underneath. And this is our dinner tonight, an Irish shepherd's pie with a lovely chive and cheese biscuit using our sourdough discard. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to send us messages or comments, any cooking questions you have or recipes you'd like to see. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.